it's probably it's the future of supply chain. The network effect of supply chain is all going to be brought together with these different types of technology. And I know that a lot of people they don't really want to hear that right now in this industry because they're operating pretty well as they are. But this is the way it's going. This is the future. Blockchain, AI, data, IoT. A little bit about myself real quick. I am in the blockchain industry, so I do like to facilitate interesting conversations, but I like to see new technology coming into a market in a sector that might actually need it in the future. So it's a little bit controversial, and I'll say one more thing. The gentleman earlier said something about the computational power and the drain on resources. And I think we're probably going to talk a little bit about that on the panel, but we need to differentiate between cryptocurrency and blockchain. Blockchain technology is the underlying technology, and cryptocurrency, in my definition, my opinion, is kind of like a byproduct of blockchain technology. So yes, when you're mining and you have a large number of GPUs, there's a huge drain on energy and resources. When you're actually running a blockchain, you can actually run a node off your computer or your mobile device. So let's really differentiate, and please keep your thought process based on that. Now we have Tanjila. She's done amazing things, been a trader across emerging markets, and I'll hand it over to Tanjila. She's going to share with you a lot of cool stuff that she's been working on, and please give her a round of applause for all the things that she's going to present to you before you even know it.
I was going to stand over there. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Tanjila Islam, the CEO and founder of TradeFlo. And I just wanted to thank Brian and Lisa and the whole Supply Chain Meetup team for putting this amazing event together. It's really been exciting to watch Brian and Lisa build this organization. And really excited to see what they've done so far and what's coming in the future. So I'm here to chat with you about blockchain and supply chain and talk to you a little about TradeFlo, where we are really building a platform for blockchain-powered global trade. But I'm going to take you through some of the lessons learned in this journey, as I've been on this journey with global trade and supply chain for about 20 years. As you can imagine, a lot of people working in supply chain, been working in the industry for a long time, and there's been a lot of questions. How and why are we to integrate blockchain into the supply chain, into international trade? And for me, it's a really exciting story. So looking back in 2009, Afghanistan, I was actually in Kabul organizing large agricultural trade fairs in Afghanistan to help promote economic development. And we actually did $20 million in international business deals during these trade fairs, and I was amazed. I was like, wow, even in a war-torn country like Afghanistan, we have the opportunity to really help grow this economy through international trade. And I was like, so why can't we start doing this through technology? And why is international trade so important? Well, when you look at the economic development and growth of the US, of Europe, of course, the emerging economies, China, India, you look at exports, exports lead to sales, sales creates jobs, and jobs create economic growth. And so international trade is known as the engine of economic growth. But time and time again, although we've seen a great growth in international trade, $17.4 trillion of world merchandise exports in 2017, unfortunately, a large percentage of businesses in the developing world are still unable to participate in and benefit from global trade. And why is that? So this is because lack of trust. Number one, international trade is all about trust. You are shipping large quantities of merchandise by air, by sea, by truck, by rail, to parties around the world who you may have never even met before. Whether these companies will be able to pay for the merchandise, whether the merchandise will arrive on time, quantity ordered, quality ordered, It's difficult. And it's very difficult for companies in emerging markets to establish a risk profile to even begin to enter into international trade. Also, it's difficult for them to then build these trusted relationships. Because if you can't even start that conversation, then how do you build that relationship over time to get credit, to get financing, to be able to grow your business? And then, of course, accessing financing. So although we've seen a massive growth in international trade, we still see a huge percentage of the world's economy not being able to benefit from it. And so really, the challenge is not that all of these companies in developing countries are being exploited. They're actually being underexploited. And this is where we have the opportunity with blockchain to come in and see how can we use this new technology to start building trust through transparency and security. And so today, international trade is costly, complicated, and time-consuming. This is from JP Morgan. They say an average transaction takes 36 original documents, 240 copies, and the involvement of 27 entities, which costs over $81 billion per year. Personally, running my own trading company for the last 10 years, I actually think the average international trade transaction requires a lot more documentation and even more entities required. And so this is international trade today. Series of papers that we have to send back and forth through different parties, to different parties, and any of you guys that are working in supply chain are quite familiar with this process. Whether it's starting with the bill of lading, certificate of origin, commercial invoice, import declaration, we have a massive amount of documentation that often has to be sent by DHL and FedEx, costing huge amount of days, times, inefficiency, also lost paperwork, lost information. It's a massive problem. And this is how we've been doing the business for the last century. And so we have so many pain points. Here, you guys know, but from Deloitte, manual processes for contract creation. Every time we do a new transaction, really creating these bill of ladings over and over again, utilizing the same data. Difficult KYC and AML control enforcement. Time-consuming documentation checks, multiple platforms, because every single company uses a different platform, even if they're using a platform, which a lot don't. Duplicate invoice factoring, so the propensity for fraud. And then, of course, costly and manual verification, reconciliation, and then delayed payments, because you have so many intermediary verifications that are usually required in every single transaction. So what's great is I see a lot of nodding heads because I'm speaking to the choir here. All of you guys are very familiar with these issues. And so what does this lead to, though? This leads to a $1.6 trillion trade financing gap, because 56% of SME trade finance proposals are rejected. And these firms report that even getting 25% of this financing would allow them to increase their employment by 20%. So this is having a significant impact on these companies worldwide. And so that's where we look at blockchain. And what is this? Everyone's talking about blockchain, but basically it's a technology that allows for a shared, authentic, decentralized, distributed ledger, so that multiple parties that are working together can actually securely and share information via the ledger, and then these processes can then be automated by smart contracts based on contracts that these companies are entering in. And we're actually working on a private permission blockchain, Hyperledger Fabric, and so our companies feel very comfortable knowing that their information is not going to be dispersed across multiple parties, but that they have secure access and control over their data. But the data that they need and want to be shared with the parties that they're doing business with can be then done in real time, which is a really important aspect. And so we look at TradeFlo. What we're focused on doing is creating trust, efficiency, and transparency in international trade. And we're leveraging the blockchain to do that. Basically creating immutability and a single source of trust for documentation that's being issued and then shared amongst the various trading partners across the transaction, which results in a reduction of time and paperwork per transaction, increased access to markets and business opportunity, and then, of course, a new asset class for investment in trade financing, which is very exciting. And so how does all this work? So basically, we focus on end-to-end trade facilitation. starting with vendor verification. When you are doing vendor risk profiles, as I'm sure many of you guys do, looking at new vendors and new markets, there's a huge risk profile that you guys are looking at. What we normally do when we're looking at our own vendors in emerging markets, we require a huge amount of due diligence in terms of trading partners, banks, accountants, legal information, government information. The collection of this documentation is hugely time-consuming. And that's what's been slowing up our trading business. And I'm sure you guys are impacted by that as well. On top of that, a lot of the information that is even reported can be fraudulent. So definitely we have dealt with the issue of industry certifications being copied, expired, purchased from another company that has a certification. These are a lot of the issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so what the vendor verification allows through the blockchain is that now any company that's being validated on the TradeFlo platform, their information is being validated by the entities or companies that are actually issuing that information. So for example, if we have a manufacturer in Kenya manufacturing denim jeans, they have to be RAP certified, BSCI certified in order to export to the US market, for example, so that they're social compliant, labor compliant, environmentally compliant. We're no longer trusting that factory to say, hey, here's our RAP certificate, here's our BSCI certificate. What we're saying is that actually BSCI and RAP are now validating that information on the ledger and timestamping it so that we know when that manufacturer is saying, hey, here's my certification, that certification is valid and it has been completed and it has been authorized by the actual certification body itself. And we do that throughout the government and with the government entities that are actually registering the company and the banks that these companies are banking with, as well as their trading partners and references. So all of a sudden, you have a much deeper level of due diligence that has taken place and that you as a prospective buyer or trading partner can then access, which is completely different and cuts down the amount of due diligence and customer onboarding time by 90%, which is a hugely significant time saving and cost saving for any international buyer looking to do business in these new markets. And so then, of course, the sales contract, PO and invoice being housed on the ledger, and merchandise authentication and inspection. International payments, we actually were part of the IBM Blockchain Enterprise Accelerator Program. So we do have a partnership with IBM where we're working with them on their TradeLens platform for logistics tracking. So once the vendor has been validated, you have come to a transaction agreement with that vendor. That transaction is then stored securely on the ledger, it's time-stamped, merchandise is then authenticated, also that information is time-stamped. Then you can actually move forward with tracking your whole shipment through the IBM TradeLens platform. They're working with Maersk as well as a number of the other large shippers. And so what this does is this really opens up trade deal transparency, which allows us to really get into the trade financing opportunity. And so like I mentioned, the benefits of the blockchain in terms of vendor verification, it allows companies to build a reputation and a risk profile, which they cannot do today in emerging markets. This simply does not exist. It increases customer trust, allowing potential buyers and trading partners to understand that this is a 360 validation done by the actual entities issuing the information or certifications, eliminating redundant onboarding costs, because again, for each manufacturer, they have to do this over and over and over again. So the same denim manufacturer will have to provide the same information to Levi's, VF, PVH, Abercrombie, every single brand, over and over again. This is a massive amount of time wasted for the manufacturer as well. So eliminating the redundant onboarding costs on both sides, external industry data validation, as well as we have the opportunity to incorporate gender reporting and environmental impact reporting, which is something that our US and international buyers have actually requested. They've been saying to us, hey, we want to understand what is the environmental impact of this company. Are they GOTS certified? Do they do organic? How many women are they employing? How many women are in their management? And so we now have the opportunity, as we begin to validate these companies and build their risk profiles, to also incorporate this data as well that's being requested by our buyers. And merchandise inspection authentication, this, for all of you guys who are familiar with international trade and transportation, it's very common part of the industry process. We usually inspect most shipments before they leave the warehouse or the manufacturing facility. And even though we have an inspection, even setting up the inspection process takes multiple days. And then collecting the data, and a huge amount of paperwork. Again, we're able to reduce that risk and reduce the claims and dispute resolution times. We're then being able to bring all of these pieces together via the blockchain, unlock trade finance. And so what we're building is a tokenized trade finance marketplace, which basically allows for transparency of deal participants, mitigates risk through fractionalization, there's a real-time approval of terms, and reduced processing times. Lenders are able to hold goods as collateral. And you can see here how it works. The fractionalization allows for increased investment opportunities in this basically new asset class. And so we can just take a look at the workflow quickly. Again, we're on Hyperledger Fabric. You can see here, each step then triggers a different step within the transaction. First business use case, we are focusing in apparel sourcing in Africa because this is a very underserved market. We have actually the AGOA Act, which is an agreement we have with African countries to help promote their economic growth and development. And even though we have $1 billion in trade currently, there's an opportunity for a lot more. And so currently we are getting ready to start onboarding manufacturers in Kenya, validating them and bringing them onto our platform this summer. So stay tuned for that. So basically, we're really excited about what we're doing. I'm happy to chat with any of you all if you would like to participate as a buyer, if you know manufacturers we can onboard. But we are really focused on unlocking global trade and catalyzing inclusive global growth. And this is really what the opportunity for blockchain is, and we're super excited about it. Reducing supply chain barriers to trade can actually increase global GDP by nearly 5%. And that's a massive opportunity. And so, very excited. Happy to take questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanjila. I think we have a handful of questions. So if you want to just pick them out, somebody will get them a mic.
There. So are you proposing that you pay using cryptocurrencies, or are you proposing fiat currencies that are converted to in foreign exchange?
So in terms of the platform and payments?
Yeah.
So that's a great question, actually. And I think one of the recurring topics that we heard throughout the conference today was, really trying to make sure that, whatever we're proposing fits the real-world use cases. And then when we're building this platform, I have another platform where we do actually international trade of excess fashion inventory, and we're working with those same customers. Those customers, unfortunately, are not ready to pay in crypto. And so although that is an option, we will be giving companies in the future. Currently, as we're building this out, we really want to be able to work with our customers and the new manufacturers that we're bringing on where they are. So they will be able to pay via fiat.
Out of curiosity, how many people in this room own cryptocurrency? Well done.
Hey, don't shame those.
I started mining cryptocurrency and became very interested in cryptocurrency in late 2014, 2015. So I just couldn't figure out how to sell it. Otherwise, I probably would have sold it in probably 2015. So it's a very interesting new way of working, and new way of doing business, and new way of living and being financially independent.
Great. Oh, okay, go ahead.
I have a follow.
Sure.
There we go. I have a follow-up question on that. For the crypto that you're intending to use, are you looking for a stable currency? And would you consider partnering with other stable currencies that are coming online? USDC, DAI, Libra?
Yeah, definitely. No, we are integrating a token. I didn't really talk about that much in this presentation, and we are looking to utilize a stable coin. And we have been in discussions with Stellar as well, looking at Stronghold and definitely looking at other options as well. IBM WorldWire is also a payments platform that they've released on Stellar, and we've been looking at that as well on the Stellar payment rail. So there's a lot of opportunities and options out there. That we are looking at in terms of introducing both a stable coin for payments as well as other uses within our ecosystem. But at the outset, we're also working with our customers, just letting them know that they're fine and they don't have to pay with crypto currently.
There's an investment side of this too, in terms of financing your letters of credit. Is that what you're offering for investment?
So the investment side, which I couldn't go into that deeply during this presentation, but basically what it is, it's an alternative lending marketplace. And so there's a lot of different types of trade financing out there. Trade letters of credit, like you mentioned, factoring, purchase order financing, invoice financing. What we're looking at, and there's a lot of blockchain companies out there trying to tackle the letter of credit, which is great because there's a lot of room and opportunity for that to basically, put those letters of credit on the blockchain and automate those payments. What we're doing is a little bit different. We're basically taking invoice financing opportunities, and usually those are very safe because you're actually financing, an invoice or a purchase order. The merchandise can usually be held as collateral, and there is a very low default rate on those types of purchases, on the loans. But the issue is a lot of companies, especially in emerging markets, are unable to access. Even though from my experience with our company, there's actually a significant amount of capital out there, particularly with alternative lenders. So what we're building on the trade financing and investment side is basically a trade financing marketplace, so that when a deal is confirmed on the TradeFlo platform, it's completely transparent in terms of the deal participants, who they are, the KYC, all of that is done. The deal itself is completely transparent in terms of PO, invoice, no duplicate invoice factoring, which is unfortunately common in our industry, as well as the merchandise has been authenticated and can be held as collateral. So then that is put onto the trade finance marketplace, and then alternative lenders can bid, and then once a bid is accepted, that whole deal is tokenized, and then it can be securitized by going back to the other lenders.
So that was the last question. Would you be trying to wrap crypto into that whole flow?
Yes, exactly. So that's a great opportunity for crypto. I think it's really exciting. It's opening up a massive new asset class for trade finance, which does not exist today, and it's allowing for capital that wants to be deployed to be put into this industry.
Thank you, Tanjila. I think we have one last question, if we can be really, really quick. Just one last question.
Hi, Tanjila. Thank you so much for this presentation. I was also really happy to see that you're focusing on Africa, because when it comes to fashion, I think it's
Quick.
prices
We're trying to be
getting
quick.
more expensive in other countries. People are turning to the continent. So my question is to you is, what are the conversations you're having around technological readiness for some of the countries in Africa that you plan to work with? I used to work in the seaport industry in West Africa, and it varies from country to country. So my question is your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's across the board in emerging markets, but definitely in Africa. And I think that's why blockchain is a great opportunity, because really a lot of the ERP, EDI systems that we see here today that are used in the US and throughout Europe are actually not being utilized in a lot of emerging markets, which are much more basic, sometimes just using Excel. But what that means is there's an opportunity then to actually start using a platform like ours to leapfrog and then actually start having like this high level of efficiency, validation, verification. And again, we are building a platform that any company can use. They don't have to install like a specific kind of software or hardware to be able to, deploy this.
Okay, I'm gonna have to cut you off, Tanjila. I love you dearly. But
All right,
the Tanjila, thank you very much. A wealth of information. The lady who's walked through the rains of Africa, right here. If anybody has any questions later on, please snag her and ask her the questions. Very good question. Thank you, West
Thanks so
Africa. So we have Patrick next. And when I met with Patrick for the first time, I found his story very, very interesting, and I just jotted down some notes. From medical to money, charities to commerce, Patrick is here, and he's going to tell you about the impact of supply chain, the language of supply chain. And I think that's very important because each of the different technologies has its own languages, and Patrick has done all kinds of things, different things throughout the world, and collected these very in-depth, interesting knowledge about the market and about supply chain specifically. And I just think he's like the translator of supply chain globally, and that's what I have taken from the conversations that I've had with Patrick. So please, round of applause for Patrick.
Thank y'all. Can y'all hear me on this? Yep, good. That'll come back on, I promise. Yeah, there we go. Thank you very much for the introduction, Kelly. Thank you, Brian and Lisa, for having us. Microsoft. Thank you, Eric, for giving me the deep dive on the world of global supply chain and logistics. Eric Johnson was my tutor as I came into this world, and it's a crazy world that is ripe for opportunity. And I think what really is one of the things that will allow for us to take this to the next level in an ecosystem adoption of next generation technology is getting dialogue, and starting dialogue starts with getting people speaking the same language. And so that's what BiTA is all about. It's creating a global vernacular around the data components that make up the supply chain technologies that power the world's economy. And so BiTA is the Blockchain and Transport Alliance, but what we're really focused on is the digitization of freight and transport. So, digitization's the word. It's thrown around a lot. I think most people in this room probably have a pretty solid understanding of legacy and analog processes across the supply chain and transport space, and the challenges that are inherent with that. We were talking about how EDI is not going away, and it serves a purpose, but it also misses out on ginormous opportunities for advancements and efficiencies. So we're focused on digitizing those legacy and analog processes and creating dialogue between counterparties. And so BiTA serves a number of purposes, but it's a member-driven organization that's focused on open source and royalty-free data standards, and we do that through member-driven organization. Our organization spans nearly 500 members that range the world's largest technology companies, so pure technology companies like Microsoft, Salesforce, Google, IBMs of the world, all the way to the physical conveyors of products, so your ocean liners, your railroad companies, your over-the-road trucking companies, airlines, everyone in between, intermediaries, financial, regulators, insurers. So it really spans the gamut, and I think that's one of the really important parts of our work, is that it brings all of these different viewpoints into the same room to create opportunities for agreement in spaces where there's otherwise competition. And that's something that we try to reiterate often. It's not where these companies compete, but where they agree. And that's where we think a lot of value unlock will be derived from. And so I think we've come to the conclusion through today's comments and probably most people's understanding of the technology that this is going to be disruptive, and it's going to play significant role in the way that the space develops, particularly over the next 5 years. This is some interesting research that's presented by IBM's Institute for Business Value Analysis. IBM is one of our members. I'm really excited about bringing them on. And this is talking about kind of the hockey stick level of adoption that they're expecting within the transportation industry. And hockey sticks are nice on PowerPoint decks. It might be a little aspirational, but there's no doubt that large enterprise companies and startups and everyone in between are looking at solutions to solve challenges in an industry that is notoriously ripe with inefficiencies and low margin. And so leveraging standards around data, we think that we're going to be able to get to a place where we'll be able to pull down a universal e-bill of lading representing what exactly is happening with your supply chain at any given time. And we think that's going to create huge opportunities across the sector for incumbents to recapture margin, but also new entrants into the space to execute in a whole new way. And so our work, we take the OSI 7-layer model into account when we try to do this. It goes from the physical layer all the way to the application layer. And BiTA is really focused on creating the language around how all these data components work, focused on interoperability. This is what is kind of a vision document of how the different data components across the supply chain ecosystem will talk to each other, leveraging data specifications. So you've got core tracking classes, so trackable entities, how they work with the conveyors of goods, equipment, parties, so information about who, what companies, what individuals might be driving a truck, or which customs inspector is actually looking at your box. It can get very granular, and it can also serve very high-level purposes. The conversations on the maritime panel were talking about good data and the necessary components about predictive analysis and where that could go. But good data in, good data out, bad data in, bad data out. This is allowing for data fidelity is really what it's about, so that you can create trust between counterparties. And that's what this is really trying to establish, is trust between counterparties. This is an example of the actual output of our first data spec. And so our work comes out as JSON code, which is highly translatable into the language of your enterprise's choice. And it comes out and it looks really simplistic when it lives on a single slide. But this is the result of representatives from every type of transport mode and intermediaries coming together to agree upon the different data components necessary to figure out exactly who or where your stuff is, whether that's in Shanghai or in Kenya, or if it's in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So it's pretty impressive to bring all these parties together and come upon commonality. So this is the shipment example. This is the text version of what the definition that's been universally agreed to around what a shipment actually represents. And similarly, and I'm just using this as an example, this is the work product of bringing all these parties together. And it looks simplistic when it comes out as a couple sentences, but it's the result of some nitty-gritty fighting to make it happen. This is the way that the shipment model data component will live within the kind of data ecosystem. And so we're doing the same thing with party right now, and I'm going to try to make up some time because I know we've got a big panel coming up. Tanjila did a great job about the benefits of blockchain to enterprises, so I won't spend too much time on this. This is a really interesting concept, and it hit upon what Tanjila was talking about, creating trust between counterparties. This is some research that came out that talks about the cost of trust globally being as high as 1/3 of global GDP. Trillions of dollars, 12 zeros associated to this. And if you look at the supply chain and transportation industry, so much of the margin is eaten up by back office legacy and analog processes associated to figuring out who your counterparties are. Who's on the other side of this transaction? Can we trust them? Have we delivered goods to them? Have they actually been delivered? Were they in good shape when they arrived? Verifying all of these data points is eating at margin. And so if we can standardize these data components and get them into an ecosystem where all of the data can speak to each other interoperably, we think that there's a huge opportunity for value to be derived. Basically, all the use cases continue to build on each other. This is going to be something that's iterative moving forward. It started with supply chain visibility, track and trace, which existing technology does a great job of. This is going to stack chain of custody, custodial documentation around bill of ladings, and we're moving towards a smart contract work group, which is that natural extension. One thing that we haven't spun up, which I think is necessary, and the next step that I'm going to try to push the organization into, is moving backwards towards the genesis of where all this data comes from. And I forgot which panel was talking about it, but I believe that the genesis block for supply chain information is the purchase order. It's that first moment where you capture intent for buyer to move goods from origin to destination. and capturing that data in a clean way that can be transferable across partners from the beginning, that's where you can really see a step change in how processes work. So use cases, again, I won't cover this. Smart contracts, I think the important part about this is this little component right here. It's a mixture of the real world and the world of code. So it's code and prose that makes the reality of a smart contract viable. So where are we going? Where are we at today? I use this slide kind of in contrast to perhaps that aspirational slide at the beginning. I think this is not a short-term project. This is something that is going to continue moving on throughout probably my career. And EDI was built in, I think, the late 60s and is still running some of the world's largest companies. This is going to be the technology that powers my children's world. So I'm really excited about where it's going. Encourage everybody to get involved. We got an event coming up in Detroit, Chicago, two events in Chicago, and many more coming out around the world. So please get involved. You can check out our standards and integrate them within your work. It's BiTA.studio/standards. They're open source, royalty free. I'm happy to work with your technology teams about proof of concepts and building them into your technology stack to move this forward. Just a concluding thought, this isn't a tech play, this is a business model change. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. So I'm happy to take questions, comments. Nate? I think there's a mic coming.
We have time for one question, unfortunately, and fortunately for Patrick.
So you're using JSON files. So as I understand that would presuppose development work on any system. So I'm wondering where the onus lies for companies that are using pre-existing systems that want to integrate. Do they have to do all the development work, or is there going to be a central carrier?
Yeah, so BiTA itself is technology and platform agnostic, so that's why we use the JSON structure so that it can translatable into whatever they are using within their enterprise.
Thank you, Patrick. How many in the room are coders? Just out of curiosity. Okay, so if you do have questions for Patrick, please feel free to pull him aside a little bit later. Now we have Michael Zargham, who is has a doctorate. I always love telling people that when someone has a doctorate. And so we have Michael and Harry Goodnight. Harry has the unfortunate last name of Goodnight when he's speaking.
We're finished.
Yeah, right. So please, these guys are going to tell you guys about who they are and what they're doing. So I'm not going to take up too much of their time. But please give a round of applause for Harry and Michael.
You know what? I can do without the clicker, so let's just roll with it. I will click on the button directly. So I'm Dr. Michael Zargham. I did my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania in the robotics lab with a group that was cross-affiliated with Wharton. I did actually decentralized optimization in networks, which was remarkably well motivated for supply chain problems, but also for a variety of blockchain challenges. This was me giving the blockchain introduction at the Supply Chain Meetup that we mentioned earlier today. I was going to say hi, I'm back, and thank you for having me again. Brian's a wonderful host. We're going to jump right into it because I know we're running behind a little bit today. So I'm going to take a brief moment to motivate looking at this as a holistic engineered system. So we had earlier a mention of cyber-physical systems, and one of my favorite things to talk about with supply chains is how they are cyber-physical systems. But there's sort of a history of sort of hybrid social and technical systems, and so I usually introduce cybernetics, socio-technical systems, and actually point out that our cyber-physical systems, our power grids, our supply chains, et cetera, they actually are, they have a history in understanding how humans and technology, goods, material, physical systems connect to economic and social, and now our sort of internet-based systems. And so in that vein, I'm going to sort of zoom in on the cyber-physical systems, and we're going to talk a little bit about why and how supply chains are cyber-physical systems. In particular, we've got our humans in the loop, we've got our networked and distributed systems. They need to be adaptive and predictive to function well. They're essentially real-time systems, though I'll grant you that a real-time system might be those 15-minute data requests, or maybe it's knowing that a particular shipment is between 2 points and that it's on schedule. But in particular, for my talk today, we're going to look at the sort of ways in which this actually affects how we should optimize and manage them. We're going to talk about blockchain, but we're also going to talk about what blockchain enables. So I'm basically breaking this apart between our sort of data, distributed ledgers, content addressable DHTs, the ability to produce data provenance, and to manage data access rights, which I think is an important part of what you've heard from the speakers so far. So rather than dive back into that aspect, we're going to talk about its implications on operations research, applied AI, and the focus on optimizing, sort of dynamically optimizing these cyber-physical systems by leveraging the kinds of technologies that we use to optimize other cyber-physical systems. And those are traditionally associated with AI and robotics, and they're made possible because of the presence of these distributed ledgers, the content addressable DHTs, the data rights management, the data provenance management. These are the sensors in these systems. And so sort of laying that groundwork, I'm going to actually hand over to Harry to motivate the supply chain.
Hi, I'm Harry Goodnight, and I've been in supply chain management and technology for 35 years. There was a little company called I2 Technologies I joined back in 1995. I ran all their industry consulting. We went from $10 million to $1.2 billion, helping to define the supply chain management arena. One of the things that always bothered me with supply chain management was we were trying to enforce a network regimen on top of a bunch of enterprise planning systems, ERPs. And the thing that most bothered me was the enterprise point of view is not the supply chain point of view. So what I really am, my proposition to you is this, is that you need a different ontology, a new way of describing the network structure, which I believe blockchain is ideally suited for. And let's just talk for a moment. Everybody owns one of these things, right? This is really a high-tech supply chain, generalized for cell phones. You're the end user out here. You go to the store to buy your phone. You have Verizon operating warehouses that are fed by Apple or Samsung, which is sourced from Foxconn, which buy their semiconductors from Qualcomm, et cetera, all the way back to raw silicon here, okay? What this diagram shows you is the levels of the flow real well, but this you can think of as representations of each one of the ERP systems. And think about that. For each of those ERPs, you have to have an integration to upstream and downstream. If I have N participants in a network, how many integrations do I have? It's a trick question. N times N minus 1, N squared. It increases with the square of the number of participants. It sucks. Who does that kind of integration in here? Yep, not fun. So a lot of that is because we believe that the description of the problem is not well represented. And if you think about it, this is what we need to be focusing on. Oops.
We're going to sleep.
There we go.
It's waking back up.
Is this thing, okay? What's really amazing, if you look at this, is actually this structure is not only the supply chain structure, it's the exploded bill of material of one of these things. So if I make this the center of my ontology, my network ontology, a lot of good things happen. But in the meantime, we're not having a good time because we're trying to integrate all these ERP systems together. There's a lot of manual reconciliation, enterprise-centric, et cetera, is bad. So everybody knows what MVOT is? Multiple versions of the truth instead of a single version of the truth, right? So what does that actually end up being? There's $3.5 trillion of working capital tied up in all of the world's supply chains, not just high-tech supply chains. That's a lot of money. But if you go back one more time,
Okay.
he's a little quick on the draw. So, and the main issue is this inability to communicate effectively, quickly about synchronizing the supply chains. 40% of a high-tech supply chain is due to information lead time. 40% of the lead time. Okay? Really bad. keep going. So what if we could actually have a blockchain representation of not only the physics of the supply chain, but the product structure itself? And have that single source of truth, instead of multiple versions of the truth, in a blockchain network. So there are a couple of projects we're working with right now, some with GSK, some with Cisco, others, that are actually doing prototypes and pilots of these systems and getting some great results as a result of it. What it would mean, though, is we could tell instantly, we could sense where problems are occurring in a supply chain and inform everyone all together how to coordinate their activities, right? Next slide. The other thing we want to do, though, is this. We don't want to just know what happened. We want to know what to do, right? Look forward in time, right? That's where we get into doing predictive analytics. This is the magic that Dr. Zargham does here. He also has a supply chain ontology in his predictive analytics systems. We can grok, everybody knows what grok is, right? We can understand the entire supply chain all in one thing and being able to look forward and predict using this digital twin of the supply chain that builds this to be able to predict what is going to happen over that ontology. Go ahead. So, and then what we can do is we can use that in conjunction with the blockchain network. We actually have a cyber-physical system here. We have a blockchain that is tracking in all of the data, keeping that and telling us up to date what is going on, which is a set of sensors and actuators, which is controlled by a digital twin that can then go ahead and tell you what to do, when, how, and why. Keeping humans in the loop, of course, but giving them the latest, greatest information and making recommendations about what to do next. Okay?
So I'm going to bring us back a little bit to tech. Brief review now. We're talking about a cyber-physical system that has this low-level technology, the protocol specifications, the access controls, and all of the information that you need to actually secure using a blockchain-based system. Harry mentioned some of the projects that are in process with a partner of ours, GenBlock, who is entirely focused on the implementation level and interacting with these large these large supply chains, and we're very much focused on the optimization of that system. And so as you move from right to left on this diagram, you sort of see that this technological implementation is enabling some actual activity in this sort of, we'll call this economic world, the global supply chains, that have some system level properties. And what we want to do is understand not just these little connection points, which is what we've always done, but we want to understand the system at the network level, at the ecosystem level. And when we do that, then we get the best power of these technologies, right? We're talking about implementing them and people are like, oh, why do I want to integrate this? It's a pain in the ass, sorry. It's just that, at the end of the day, the value proposition isn't always that well articulated, in part because the value proposition lives at this meta level. It's the whole ecosystem that's benefiting. On an individual relationship basis, people are like, hey, I have some, rules and I follow them and it was a real pain to figure out how to follow them. And so now that I'm doing it, don't make me change the rules. I'm going to use the ones that I have. And what we're going to say is, you know what, we need these things. We have to have these schemas, the types of specs that are being put together by BiTA. We need to have all of that, and the value proposition is all the way up a level. It's not because you implemented that specification. It's because you can build out systems level understanding and of the whole network, not just of the individual part. And so this is my favorite diagram. It comes from basically applying AI theory to real human systems, and we use a simulation framework called CAD, which was developed internally by my team. That's complex adaptive dynamics, computer-aided design. Do you ever imagine what it would be like to do computer-aided design of a supply chain network instead of just winging it, actually stepping back and thinking about the whole thing, being able to run a simulation that demonstrated the sensitivity to certain assumptions, the sensitivity to certain shocks, and actually be able to make really discerning decisions? Well, what we do is basically use our mathematical modeling frameworks that are drawn from the cyber-physical systems, the networked sort of hybrid dynamical systems, and then fit them and integrate them with data, which wonderfully enough, the blockchain is going to be providing in higher granular, more trustworthy ways within these supply chain systems. And we can do computational projections that would be consistent with your sort of OR workflows and use them to drive decision making at a low level, automating, at a higher level, guiding and informing. And currently, this is the kind of nuts and bolts of it. We talk about things in terms of business logic differential equations. If you want to understand a real system, you can't just think about it as a flat thing. It's how it changes that matters. And so this is a little bit of an example from a supply chain representation where this thing on the left is essentially a bunch of pointers to other functions. So each one of those functions is a logical business logic block. This wires into what is essentially a business logic circuit, and in particular, this is a process occurring on this high-tech supply chain. So the idea, though, is there's an underlying networked ontology, there's an underlying networked data structure, and then there's the ability to do analysis projections. Like real robotics-grade AI isn't, supervised or unsupervised machine learning. It's actually system identification. You have a system model that is ontologically well aligned with the underlying system, then you have data, and then you enrich your model and identify the system, and then you use that to make decisions to do dynamic optimization. And so our dynamic optimization is sort of part and parcel with the tools that we're building at BlockScience, and this is a relatively simple output from a web app that we made working with clients. For now, we tend to wrap our models up into microservices, and we're working at different integration points, but it's currently on an individual basis. So we sort of have to make custom models that are appropriate for the systems that we're helping support, but our real goal here is to leverage the fact that blockchains are incredible sensors for business systems. But sensors, no one wants to see every minute little piece of detail from a bunch of really high fidelity sensors. What they want is to either automate something at a low level or make good decisions about something at a high level, or both, preferably both. And so what we're looking to do is increase the way that we leverage blockchains so that the data that they provide leads to the kind of automation and optimization and efficiencies that we can realize now that just weren't possible. And that means the value add is ecosystem level, as opposed to being individual. And that's a hard sell sometimes, so it's important that we have organizations and communities that help get us all aligned behind sort of technological adoption, where doing it together is a huge lift, but doing it individually is almost none. And so I think it's really important to be careful of that. So that is the end of my talk.
I don't know how much time, Brian, how much time do we? One question. Take your pick. Either you get Michael or Harry. There's a question in the back. Direct your question.
So this changes everything, right? And in terms of how you organize businesses around supply chain. So logistics, shipping, trucking, everything. So if you could say, what are the 3 things that would have to change on the people side of the business? So what are the competencies that you foresee will have to change so that businesses can become your theory?
I will say we got 3 things. The first thing is that our executives and our decision makers need to become significantly more technically literate, because right now the understanding of how even optimization, much less like extremely high grade optimization, it's not a crystal ball. Understanding how to use it and to make good decisions with projections. I think that from a sort of at the implementation level, we have to be a little less afraid to make technological shifts. I think in a slow-moving industry, it's just really hard to build the conviction behind a shift. And for this shift to happen, there needs to be pretty high-level buy-in. And I think I'm going to leave it at those are the 2 main things. And it's the third thing is literally those being aligned in time. You can't have one and then the other. You actually have to have the technical literacy, and you need to have that sort of buy-in together. And I think that the existence of the Federation here, the existence of BiTA, I think the human part of that system is coalescing, but actually the people in this room, we have to realize that it's actually about that part. I think we have the blockchain, we have the system theory, we have the sort of advances in AI. Like, we don't have the cross-mixing between the technical leaders and the business leaders, and like crossing those, and actually that's where it's going to count.
We don't have a shared language to do that crossing, and I think that's something that's
That's a very, very good point.
You left me off ramp like 5 minutes ago. Honestly, it's amazing
I-
what you're talking about. I didn't understand a lot of it.
Okay, all right, we have, sorry to cut you off. I just want to say that thank you very much, Harry and Michael. If anybody wants to know how to break into Oxford, Michael's the first one to do it. And if you don't ask him anything else, please ask him that. Okay, we're going to have one more question here, because he's going to shout out anyway. Men do that, don't they?
You're talking about your volume. What kind of trading exchange you're using, actually?
Excuse me, I couldn't.
You were talking about your buy-in.
My buy-in?
You're buying on your nods and everything on your supply chain.
Your volume,
Your volume.
VOLUME.
This thing here?
Are you talking about transaction volume?
Well, he's talking about all the nods on the supply chain, and it's actually his buying value. So you're buying in, but what kind of trade exchange are you utilizing on that?
So there are corporations that are looking at. I mean, you look at something like Apple, you look at Cisco, you look at GSK. They look at that. They're calling this their glass pipe. Okay, this is how they view their business. So best of breed are absolutely doing this right now. What they're also doing though is they're coming into a transition to a network point of view, not just this ERP point of view. I mean, I enumerated a bunch of reasons why not, but I believe people need to jump on the ecosystem network bandwagon. So you asked about what changes. CEOs need to have an ecosystem level point of view and understand what that transition is going to be from current to future state. The ones that get that they're playing in an ecosystem are going to win. The ones that don't are out of here.
That's a very, very good point. And if anybody has any more questions or follow-up questions. Yes, go, run. Please track these guys down. Thank you very much, Harry Goodnight and Michael Zargham.